like globally, what we ran into at Walmart is a lot of people in farms had their kids working in the farm,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you, oh, I don't know. I was just didn't know if there was something when you guys look at it, you have a something in mind.
Yeah. So it is pretty specific. Um,
Oh, good to know.
but I would say typically what we do is we would say, and this would be looking at international standards,
Right,
that
right.
no one should be employed or work if they're younger than 15.
This Get Ready to Be Ready episode has been brought to you by the World Trade Center, Arkansas. To ensure you stay up to date on new podcast episodes and more Get Ready to Be Ready series posts, be sure to follow us on Instagram at WTC.Arkansas and subscribe to our YouTube channel at World Trade Center, Arkansas 9014.
Very pleased to be here with a former colleague of mine, Doug Nystrom. We work together at Walmart. He is an expert in responsible sourcing, and so I'm very, very honored to be speaking with him today. Doug, can you just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what you're doing now and kind of your focus?
Yeah, Jana, glad to be here with you. So I was with Walmart for about 10 years until January, and my role at Walmart was looking at human rights in the supply chain and the operations, and director of human rights for making sure that forced labor wasn't in the supply chain, to kind of come up with solutions for how to uncover it, mitigate against it, eradicate it, do all those different things. As you can imagine, it wasn't just forced labor, but all human rights, safety of workers, for example, in our supply chain at Walmart, and then also ESG. And then a few months ago, moved over to a company called Impact Limited. And Impact is a business and human rights consulting group that operates. Headquarters are in the UK. I'm the associate director for North America. And so my role is to basically provide quality consulting advice that brings value to businesses while improving the lives of workers in supply chains, particularly. So Impact does a lot of investigative work. They do advisory services on human rights due diligence, and basically help companies all over the world. We have offices in the UK, China, India, Bangladesh, and here in the US.
So, and we've talked before, but I do think today we're going to be talking a lot about obviously supply chain due diligence, right? And so
Right.
it's a really timely discussion to have because it was 1 year ago this month that the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act went
That's right.
into effect. So there's been a lot of changes and a lot of things that have happened since that. But that act has actually totally, laser focused all of us in the US and around the world, I think, quite frankly, on forced labor. So, can you, like, for those that are like listening in or those that are want to know more, can we talk a little bit about the US
Mm.
ban and kind of like the US focus on all of this?
Yeah, certainly. So the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that you mentioned, that became effective June 21 of last year, that actually builds off another law, the Tariff Act of 1930.
Mhm.
And that act actually prohibits the importation of all goods, articles, merchandise, whatever, mined, produced, manufactured whole or in part,
Whole arm part.
things with forced labor. And so you can't import those things into the US. So it could be just a piece of a product, could be the whole product or whatever. If it contains forced labor, the Customs and Border Patrol has the right to prevent that importation. Now, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act created a rebuttable presumption around what is forced labor with regard to products that are coming from a particular province in China
Mhm.
that's known by Xinjiang or XUAR. That province, you cannot import any products made in whole or in part from that, because that is not de facto, but it is a presumed to be forced labor because
So-
of the internment camps there.
So let's just talk for 1 second about that province,
Yeah.
because they from that region, they supply a lot of very important and prevalent materials,
That's
cotton, and materials for solar panels. And so you kind of, I think you can get a little tripped up without knowing about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that province, basically what's going on from what everybody, all the data outside of China is showing that there are poverty alleviation programs where they're taking Uyghurs and re-educating them, putting them into camps, and they use them for labor purposes. And that has been production of garments, but it's increasingly more production of raw materials. So you see some of the components like tomatoes, not a raw material, but
Right.
tomatoes are primarily coming from their cotton from that province. 80% of the cotton in China is coming from there. Lithium is going into batteries. That's a new one. Polysilicon, PVC, calcium carbonate, all of these things that are going into other products we see are coming from China's XUAR Xinjiang province.
So
And
what?
so it's
Oh, go
de
ahead.
facto forced labor. Sorry.
Right. No, so I was just, so what we're looking at going forward is how is the U.S. kind of cracking down on that? What can they do? What is Customs and Border Patrol doing? How are they in reality managing that influx of, those critical materials, frankly?
Yeah. So you really have multiple departments. So you can look at Department of State talking about all of these things going on in China with their trafficking in persons report. You can look at the Department of Labor. They put out the list of goods made with forced labor and child labor, and they're including goods from Xinjiang. But then particularly the enforcement pieces coming from DHS, and under DHS you have Homeland Security, you have CBP enforcing it. So the Customs and Border Patrol is looking at shipments. They're doing a lot of research, I can tell you that. And they look at certain reports that are coming out there's one by Dr. Laura Murphy, Sheffield Hallam, those reports, that's a university in the UK. And it seems like every time they come out with a new report, you find these detentions of products related to that report. They're also using high-tech software, and there's lots of different providers of how do you figure out so let's say cotton, where a shirt is coming from.
Right.
And CBP is actually employing some of that to kind of look at the DNA of the cotton in the shirt to see if it came from Xinjiang or not.
So while the CBP is doing all of this and your product is sitting there, like in real time, in real world, what does that mean to people who are trying to import those products without having kind of done the proper supply chain due diligence, right? So they're stuck.
That's right. It means you can't access those products. You will have some time, if it gets detained at the port of entry by CBP, they will then give you a notice. That notice will give you some time frame to actually respond to it, to show that, hey, this isn't made with forced labor, and you've got to have some clear and convincing evidence to show that it's not. You can actually show that it's outside of the UFLPA scope,
right? Or
you can show that you have the right, you've done the due diligence. This isn't forced labor, even if it's coming from Xinjiang. You can show an exception, but that's very rare, and I don't think it's ever been admitted, because if they do have an exception, they have to report to Congress, and that's just I don't think it's going to happen.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, no. So it's a quagmire for those people trying to import, and also like trying to think about supply chain due diligence, right?
Yeah.
So what guidance has CBP in the past year? Because it's a rebuttable presumption but
Right.
then it's clear and convincing evidence. So it's really a heavy burden for people to prove that's coming in. So have the CBP come up with more guidance to let people know what they should be doing? How can they really kind of meet those requirements?
Yeah, they have. They put together a strategy document, which is pretty wordy. There's a forced labor enforcement task force
Yeah.
that actually has put together a document called the UFLPA strategy. Before I mention some of that, I might just add too that since last year, since the implementation,
Right.
there have been over 4,200 shipments detained, and of those, 1,600 have been released. So that means, and then 679 have been denied. So
Wow.
that means there's still close to 2,500 roughly that are pending.
Wow.
So, and it's increasing and increasing, the enforcement. And I might add too, this is bipartisan. So
Right.
don't be thinking that this is one party versus the other. There is wholehearted support for stopping forced labor, in particular Uyghur forced labor.
No.
But to your point about, what are some of the guidance that they've given? The guidance is really that you need to be looking at your supply chain. And you'll be doing due diligence. And what they mean by that is you have effective supply chain tracing. So you know where your products and the inputs for the products are coming from, that you can document. We know that this cotton came from this place, or lithium came from a different place than Xinjiang. So you have tracing, you have due diligence, you have management systems and measures in place, that you're not just flying blindly and just looking at maybe your final product. So all of those, what I would call human rights due diligence systems are in place.
So a question then, so you're like taking stock in what your supply chain looks like, right? So are you actually like doing testing on your products? Because along the line, just to say, here, I have evidence of this being, a pure and appropriate thing to come into the US.
Yeah,
Like
that's one way to do it. That would be a piece of it. You could also be looking at, they may want to say, okay, let's say you're buying something from China, or there's an input from China. Can you track where they're getting it? Like within China.
Right.
So there's certain entities too that you want to avoid that are on the UFLPA entity list. All those are banned as well.
That is right. Right.
And so you can do due diligence online, or you can hire a company to help you with this, or you can pay for, some providers have these services where you can enter names and data, and you can even go to these reports that I mentioned with Sheffield Alam. They've mentioned a lot of those entities, and most of those have moved to the blacklist. And what we're seeing is entities are changing names in China to avoid being on the blacklist. There's lots of movement to make sure that these products aren't blocked. So that requires even more work.
Well, and I know that, and this is like your area. Hey, so for just 1 second, let's talk a minute about the entities that are on that list, because how do they get on that list? What are they? What are those? They're not really coming from that region, but these people are related to that region in a way that's unacceptable and on notice of other countries. Other countries are on notice that they are dealing with them.
That's right. So some of the entities are in the region of Xinjiang. So you have some that are like a mining company, that's mining for lithium that goes into car batteries or other lithium batteries. They'll get on there through CBP's research, or they might get on there because they've seen research of other people, like the Sheffield Alam reports. Those have been named, and so there's a number of entities that came out of those. So they're piggybacking on the research of others a lot of times, and but it's looking for connections to Xinjiang in particular. And I might add too that what's going on as well is you can't just say, okay, is it made in whole or in part in Xinjiang? Because now what's going on is you have the Uyghurs being moved around the country. So it's called labor transfer. And so they're taking them from Xinjiang and they're shipping them to another province, but they're still under that control of the the Chinese government. And so they're monitored all the time. They don't get their full pay. They're basically in all the elements of forced labor under international law seem to be applied.
Because it's interesting because it's a way to kind of like it's more of a scatter now, trying to kind of make sure you have the finger on the pulse of forced labor in your supply chain.
That's
so kind of thinking through, because I know that other countries are concerned and worried, like the EU is worried, Mexico and Canada is worried. So maybe as we're sitting here in Arkansas, we could really touch on the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement and see what, because they have some deadlines that we're hitting or some times that have just or things that are kicking in with respect to forced labor. So we should probably talk about that a minute. What do you think?
Yeah. So when the USMCA was drafted and negotiated, one of the things that the U.S. really wanted to get in there was this ban on forced labor, not necessarily Uyghurs and Xinjiang, but forced labor in general, and they did, and so that is part of the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Everything didn't get implemented all at once. Mexico now has a forced labor regulation that bans forced labor from being imported into Mexico, or bans goods. Again, when I say forced labor being imported, I mean goods or products made in whole or in part with forced labor. So that it went effective May 18th of this year. Canada, they also banned forced labor imports, goods made with forced labor, but they added child labor as well to that ban. And then they're also going to be requiring in Canada something new that goes beyond this, which is really reporting. They're requiring companies to report on their efforts to fight forced labor and child labor in their supply chains. And that will be coming into effect next year. And that may affect US-based businesses doing business in Canada as well. And then the EU is also looking at, and I think it's just a matter of time before that actually gets implemented and drafted, of a ban of products, or other things made in whole or in part forced labor.
So, again, like thinking about our Arkansas businesses, right? And we, people are kind of going, well, I don't import, so why do I need to be concerned? But I think that you could probably make a very, very good argument why they should be. So let's make sure that people are aware of like where they need to, what rocks they need to turn over.
That's right. Remember, I keep saying made in whole or in part. What you need to do is, you may not be importing your product, maybe you're manufacturing it here, but we're such a global society now. There are things in your product that you need to break it down and see where are the components coming from. Where's the cotton coming from for the shirts you're making and selling? Where is the dye coming from for whatever may be going into that? Where is if it's I don't know, maybe more of a manufacturing type of a piece. There's a lot more components in that. So if you have any electronics, there's a good chance it's coming from South Asia. And even if it's not China, there have been some withhold release orders on electronics, not necessarily in China. So CBP is looking at electronics in other places, because what we're seeing is China's even shipping things around. But even if they don't, there's other countries that are doing bad practices around forced labor. And so you need to be monitoring all of those. Basically break down your product, whatever you're selling, and determine where are things coming from. Where are my suppliers getting their inputs? It's not just you, your supplier may be another US-based supplier, but where are they getting their stuff? So you need to start going up that supply chain for all the different components.
So that brings me to this, which is, what are those best practices, that people need to have in place, or to know they better get in place if they're trying to kind of do what they can to make sure their supply chain is is safe but secure, forced labor is not involved, and how they can show that it's not involved, demonstrate that. But what are those best practices?
That's right. So, so everybody tends to look in this area, we call it human rights due diligence kind of broadly. Right. And responsible sourcing could be another way of looking at it. But if you look at kind of the gold standard, it's there internationally, it would be, first of all, you embed policies and management systems into your policies. So human rights due diligence is embedded into that. But I would, as I mentioned, then second of all would be identifying, and that's really knowing your supply chain. So identify where these adverse human rights impacts, and I'm going broader than just forced labor here. It may be that there are adverse human rights impacts to discrimination, abuse of workers, withholding of passports, in another country for migrant workers particularly vulnerable in supply chains. And so it's embedding the right policies into your business. It's identifying where the risks for adverse impacts to people in your supply chain or in your operations. It would be then ceasing and preventing and mitigating those risks or those impacts. Fourth would be tracking the implementation results. Fifth would be communicating that with a broader audience. How are those impacts addressed? Being open and transparent about it. And then the last would be, if you have found some things, help and participate in remediating if appropriate, or where it's appropriate, because it may have been caused by your practices as a company at some point. Whether it's the way you buy or the way you demand things, that has repercussions up the supply chain and can cause companies to adversely impact human rights on people.
So are there good resources for Arkansas small businesses that, we can go through this list of what they need to do, but I think sometimes they need to know how to do it, what exactly does it mean for us to put these things in place? Are there resources for people to be looking to that will be accepted as kind of the international standard, or something that's acceptable by CBP and the U.S. government? The things that they just need to make sure that they're doing something that, is thoughtful, wise, and what at least, sets them on the right track, so.
Yeah, definitely. First would be give me a call.
There you go, Doug.
Send me an
Absolutely.
email.
I know you are the expert on this for sure. We'll make sure we get you out there.
But other things would be, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperative Development, has put out some guidance. You can go to their website and see some documents. They have guidance on doing this for apparel and footwear and supply chains. They have it on mining. They have it on apparel and footwear. They have it just on responsible business conduct. So you can get a lot of good materials there. And in the 6 steps that I went through are actually part of that. That advice. That would be a good starting point. And I think a big piece is just start asking questions of your suppliers. That's the biggest starting point, is just have the conversation about where is this coming from, and then start documenting it.
So, that brings up a really good point. So we've been talking about Uyghur, we've been talking about China, but there are other areas in the world that we know that have a propensity for this. I know kind of the shrimping industry, sugarcane, coffee. So where are some of those things that people might like? And those are really going to be inputs often that people don't think about. And I know you're an expert on all that. So
one of the that's a good point. One of the new withhold release orders that actually was implemented by CBP since this UFLPA was put in place last year, but it doesn't relate to UFLPA, is sugar from a particular company in Dominican Republic called Central Romana. So if you have sugar and your sugar is coming from Dominican Republic, I would be careful, particularly if it's coming from Central Romana, because they're under a WRO right now. And at Impact, we're actually working on the ground to help the situation there improve conditions for workers. The situation is essentially Dominican Republic has brought in Haitian migrants into basically doing the whole sugarcane production of actually harvesting it, growing it, and all that. And the conditions have not been good. And so CBP has determined that, and labor as well, Department of Labor, they've been working on this for years. But so that I would look at sugar. And I would also add, this isn't just a non-US thing. If you've seen some of the news, the New York Times put out an article recently about a well-known company in the US that you would think, for a long time we thought the US, there's no risk, right?
I know exactly where you're going.
Well-governed country,
right?
But they have found child labor at a systemic level, and this is migrant workers that are unaccompanied coming across the border into the US, now being employed by very respectable companies on night shifts while going to school during the day in dangerous jobs. And it's not just employed by the company, but it's maybe a labor provider that's bringing cleaning services to the factory. And so that labor provider is employing migrants that are underage. And so this whole issue needs to be looked at every level. It needs to be on the radar of everybody.
Well, and I have to say, I even look at our state and how they're kind of changing child labor law right now, because we're tinkering with the age and, parent sign off and everything. So it is definitely something that we, need to be mindful and thoughtful and watch out for that, not only because of it being in your supply chain, but because it's the right thing to do. So, okay. So we have like these products that are coming in, and I want to touch on this one thing that is really important that I know you've teed up for me to talk about. And so we need your guidance on this. And it's talking about, if you have a product that's detained, what do you do?
Yeah, I would say in that situation, hire a trade lawyer. Somebody who's familiar with customs that can work through that problem. But prior to that, hopefully you've done your work and pulled together documentation to show that this particular product, this shipment, does not contain forced labor. And if you've done that, then you're going to present your documents to CBP, and they'll be happy and they'll let you have your products. If it doesn't work, if you haven't done your work, there's a good chance that it'll just be in limbo, or they'll actually have evidence showing that it is forced labor and you won't get your products. But the best way is to get a trade lawyer to kind of help you navigate that, because it's going to be hard to navigate by yourself.
Right. So I'm gonna step back just because it's a really kind of a personal curiosity, and I know you're the expert on this. As you look at forced labor and you look at child labor laws and you look at, taking passports and the thing, are there things like, is there a 1, 2, 3 of things that people should go, that's a red flag? I'm really seeing something that shouldn't be going on in the supply chain with respect to these people that are working here. I mean, there must be something that just screams, oh, there's an 8-year-old working, there must be things that just, call out to you that go, you should know better. This is a red flag.
Yeah. One, and it doesn't mean it's there, but I would say
exactly.
migrant labor is going to be a big one. If your product is coming from a country or involves migrant labor,
Right.
they're a vulnerable population, very
Yeah.
easily subject to abuse.
Yeah.
And what we have seen in the past is, give you an example, Malaysia, they don't have the workforce, so they have to import labor. And
Right.
so they're getting labor from Nepal, they're getting it from Bangladesh, they're getting it from Thailand or Indonesia. It wouldn't be Thailand, sorry, it'd be Myanmar.
Right.
And they're basically those workers. Typically what's happened in the past is they're recruited, and the employer in Malaysia pays nothing for the cost of those workers. And the workers bear the cost. And so they
Right.
pay for everything to get to that company. And then they're in debt, and then they have a 3-year contract, and they're paying that debt off, but so they have nothing to live on.
Right.
And then there's also a recruiter that's often involved who may be manipulative, taking money off the top from their wages. Then you have the employer withholding their passport, keeping
Right.
it for safekeeping is what they might say. And basically that worker can go nowhere, because they
Right.
don't have their passport. They're stuck in the dorm 24 hours a day or in the factory.
Right.
And so their movement is restricted. And so that would be a red flag. I'd say, okay, we need to look at this, and that's
Right.
what's happening in the US too. In particular is migrant labor that I just
Yep.
mentioned. We got these people that, they're scared, they're vulnerable. And so it's something that I would look at first. I would say I'd also look at products, you can actually download an app from the Department of Labor iLab. It's called Sweat and Toil app, and they also have another app called Comply Chain. Sweat and Toil actually will list products, countries that have been deemed to have been made with forced labor. So you can just kind of, that's a great way to just kind of do a gut check on your products or where they're coming from. And it covers forced labor, forced child labor. So, and then the Comply Chain app, I should add to what we talked about earlier, is a great resource for helping you think about how to do these things.
Right.
It's a free resource available through iLab that you can download and gives you some direction. So those would be some red flags, I would say,
Right.
to your question.
So, okay, to try to kind of think through what we've talked about, we've covered a lot, and to try to kind of wrap this up, what would be kind of the top couple of things that you would really want to emphasize and make sure people walk away with today?
Yeah.
It's 1, 2, 3, but it's something that they're on notice now, and it's on their mind, and they're like, oh, maybe I should check that out. What would those couple of things be?
I would say know your supply chain for one.
For sure.
Where are the things coming from that go into the product that you're selling or manufacturing or whatever it is? You may think you know it, but I would dig deeper, because there are so many components and parts. And so first, know your supply chain. Second would be know your suppliers. And when I say know them, ask questions. You should have a code of conduct that is in every contract with suppliers that says these suppliers need to adhere to your responsible sourcing standards. You should have already created some standards and say, we do not manufacture anything or allow our suppliers to sell to us anything that's made with forced labor or violating human rights. That should be a given. And so I think know your supplier, ask questions of them, require these things of your suppliers, know your supply chain, and then work with your suppliers. Treat them as a partner in this, to kind of figure this out, because, it's for them as well. It's their profit that's on the line too. And if you get into those thorny issues, with products detained or anything like that, that's where we can help, like at Impact, we do a lot of
Right.
like due diligence mapping and helping companies with that proactive part. But we also do a lot with investigative work. So, it's hard to know about what's going on at a factory thousands of miles away.
Right.
You can do supply chain audits. You can require those, but they only go so far as insights, because
Right.
it's easy to hide this stuff.
Right.
At Impact, what we do is we really focus on worker interviews. So we'll have somebody going into a factory as a lead assessor, talking to the management. Then we have somebody dedicated, in the language of the workers, talking to them for the whole day or 2 days that we're there. And that often uncovers things. And then we often leave with a hotline so they can call and ask us questions, or something
Right.
they thought of later and they didn't want to say in front of somebody else. So investigate,
Right.
and determine, is this forced labor? Is there a problem? But that's all goes to knowing your supply chain.
Right. I do want people to, you are such an expert in this area, but then Impact is global. So I do want to make sure that we give everyone kind of your contacts and their company's contacts. So, because I think that you may be getting a lot of calls as people see this and watch this. So, but with that, I want to really thank you for your time. We will make sure that we'll get the phone number out there or post it or send it or just Doug Nystrom. I appreciate it. And I know you guys do good work at Impact. So appreciate you.